The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for. How many times have you heard since your school days in literary class that some piece of media still resonates today? I bet your mind has grown callous from it. But resonance comes in many forms. Good versus evil, love versus hate, jealousy and avarice. But what about faith, religion and God? Imagine yourself among the first to pose these questions so bluntly and with frightening honesty in the midst of a strict and deeply traditional Christian society, an act that borders on rebellion or a riot. So before we dismiss that overused turn of phrase, let's ask ourselves, how far have we truly come in understanding the most basic of existential questions? Or have we merely shielded ourselves from the uncomfortable emptiness and endless void by coating our daily lives in busy work and constant flow of information? Is the void out there, on the edge of the universe? Or worse, staring back from the mirror? Could anyone reasonably argue that having goals in life gives us purpose and becomes the driving force behind our confidence and happiness? Some might. But what if instead of chasing purpose through effort, you're suddenly presented with a single, deceptively simple question, or a brief austere parable that quietly shatters your sense of self forever? Yes, forever. At this point, consider yourself warned. After all, even F. Scott Fitzgerald thought to recommend Dostoevsky's magnum opus to his own daughter. It would be absurd to try listing every significant figure who's been influenced by this novel. Personally, I single out Cormac McCarthy because I'm fascinated by his prose, and Martin Heidegger, whose contributions to modern philosophy I find groundbreaking and visionary. What's especially revealing is how many prominent minds have felt compelled to share their thoughts on Dostoevsky, but more on that later. Some say this is more a philosophical treatise than a novel. Others claim it's a manifesto. Notable critics once called it a window into the mysterious Russian soul. Personally, I resist labeling this masterpiece at all. It's all of the above and then some. A deep dive into the 19th century Russian life, its rituals and rigid norms, the injustices of a man's world, the spiritual wrestling of belief and doubt, and the eternal struggle between God and the devil. And that's just scratching the surface. Rather than attempting the Herculean task of unpacking every theme, I want to tempt you, dear viewer, into reading the Brothers Karamazov by reflecting on one of its deepest and most vital subjects, faith and religion. This is a wellspring of questions and reflections worthy of human thought until the day we find a definitive answer. If such a day ever comes. Until then, we can only strive to inch closer to it. Whether we like it or not, a day arrives for most of us when we must finally confront these questions. It's easier for some to dismiss them in youth, though not all can. Some are even blessed with the blissful ignorance of going through their life without ever dwelling on such things. But if you are watching this, I'm certain you're not one of them. I mean, you clicked on a Dostoevsky video after all. I want to emphasize this once again. I'm not trying to make an essay on the entire novel and its themes. What I aim to do is solely focus on one of the most important ones. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the heart of man. It's highly uncharacteristic for a classic Russian novel to lack thorough descriptions of settings, people's appearances, and their surroundings. In that sense, the Brothers Karamazov sometimes borders on being minimalistic. There's just enough for us to finish painting the picture ourselves. The dialogue and the emphasis on specific actions during those dialogues are all we're offered, as we witness scenes that help us become familiar with the time, the place, and its people. They're rich and poor, some accomplished and for that reason serious and uptight, others spoiled by their status and resources, or lack thereof. But before we even meet our characters, we read a whole book one of the first part in which not a single word is spoken aloud. It's devoted to an almost clinically dry chronicle of the Karamazov family, up to the moment we encounter them in the second book. It's immediately apparent that you're reading something special, even more so if you keep in mind that it was written in the late 1800s, a time when romanticized and poetic prose almost never gave way to the harsh and prosaic. This approach, so alien to what we typically expect from the classical narration, is beautifully contrasted with the later crime novel elements presented through an unreliable narrator. The unreliability emerges in how we receive our first impressions of each character, as if hearing about them through gossip. It's never quite accurate nor able to offer the full picture. That leaves room for speculation and our own conclusions once again. It's not that we're given too little, far from it, but the information doesn't come from the narrator directly. Instead, we're offered enough in the way of actions and rhetoric to judge whether his testimony and background align with the reality unfolding before us. The style supports it by setting up a scene in seldom strokes and letting us fill in the blanks by ourselves. Dostoevsky trusts his reader's intelligence. This elusive way of drawing us into the novel serves two purposes. First, it fits the crime novel's structure, helping sustain a mystery more profound than any day-to-day meddling of even the highest societies or noblest of causes. And second, it supports the deeper enigma of human existence, the question whether our beliefs and values are to be tested daily or just once, with such ruthless precision that it leaves us shattered and incapable of picking up the pieces. Dostoevsky's moral, philosophical and social commentary was placed by Belgian poet Emile Verhaeren in the company of Shakespeare and Balzac, while Francis Scott Fitzgerald claimed that The Great Gatsby was influenced by the Brothers Karamazov. It challenges Kant's critique of pure reason, in the ways we'll discuss later in the video. It's fair to say that the novel has left some of the world's brightest minds pondering its thesis for centuries. If you're familiar with classic Russian literature through your school curriculum, you might already expect the abundance of French, since the Russian nobility commonly spoke it daily, some to the point of bilingualism. However, that tendency isn't taken to the extreme here. French is used more for atmosphere than for strict historical authenticity. You won't find entire pages in French like in Tolstoy's works. The way this crime novel style intrigue begins as a cleverly crafted puzzle tempting the reader to discover who the proverbial killer is, and then slowly morphs into a narrative flooded with existential dread and despair, or conversely, the steadfastness of faith, is absolutely fascinating. No single answer is ever offered, just a barrage of parables in every form imaginable. They might appear as drunken argument in a crowded bar or a solemn story told by elder. Each one is equally thought-provoking and lingers, well, forever. Where did the author place himself in his work? I'd wager everywhere. Being his final book, it's the work of a mature genius with nothing left to prove. His task here is to confront eternity. I'd even speculate that the family head's name, Fyodor, was chosen deliberately. Dostoevsky's daughter once remarked that he had much in common with his own father. And I'd add, whether we like it or not, we're all our father's sons. It's worth mentioning that some notable critics of the time pointed to several contemporary prototypes for the novel's most rotten and decadent characters. But I find myself doubting whether this went beyond a few borrowed traits, dabbed onto the canvas to paint a truly revolting nobleman. To sum up the literary style of Brothers Karamazov, it's a multi-layered Russian doll of a novel. Only the first doll is wielding a bronze pestle and smiling sinisterly, and the dolls that follow resemble the Four Horsemen. What I love most about Dostoevsky's writing is the confidence and his deep understanding of human nature. If Blood Meridian is a descent into the American subconscious, then the Brothers Karamazov is your ticket to the Russian psyche. though personally I find both profoundly universal. I think the devil doesn't exist, but man has created him. He has created him in his own image and likeness. As I already mentioned, the skeleton of the novel's story is the crime of patricide around which the novel revolves. We're introduced to a nice little family, as per the name of the first book, giving us a dry factual understanding of how fundamentally broken this family must be, without a shadow of a doubt. At this point, I must warn my dear viewers that this part of the video covers a quick rundown of the book's plot, so if you want to avoid spoilers, please skip this chapter by using timecodes in the description or clicking the progress bar. Thank you. Having drawn our own opinions from this thorough introduction, we're energized to finally meet the characters in person in the second book. It'll be the head of the family, his youngest, and the brother of the deceased wife of the aforementioned head. For most of us, the expectations we had after gathering some facts about them are met and further exacerbated. The middle brother, Ivan, is present by means of his article on religion. The oldest, Dmitri, appears to have a scandal with his father over inheritance and the lady they're both enamored with. Everything, from the participants to the location the meeting takes place, was planned by Fyodor Pavlovich, the old buffoon. The aptly named chapter, an inappropriate gathering, turns out to be a complete disaster, as per intention. We're then introduced to a slew of characters who will play major roles in the third book. Of the three sons, only Ivan lives with his father and the servants who reside in the servants' house. Among the servants is the Karamazov's bastard son, who was sent to Moscow to learn cooking. My guess is that Ivan was the only one both exalted and jaded enough to endure such company. He engages in theosophical arguments with Alyosha, Smerdyakov, and their father. Dmitri is only there once, to beat up his father and threaten him with death. We meet the third part of the love triangle, Grushenka. Along with us, Dmitri's fiancé also lays eyes on her for the first time. The woman Dmitri is engaged to is humiliated by Grushenka. Book 4 opens the second part, and it's probably the hardest to digest, at least for me, because it delves into the repercussions of adults' actions on children. Alyosha becomes witness to schoolboys bullying their classmate, and is left puzzled when he's rewarded with a bitten finger for intervening, courtesy of the bullying victim. We're just as puzzled, but later discover that Alyosha is the son of the impoverished army captain who was publicly assaulted by Dmitri in a very demeaning manner. This book introduces one of several subplots that will run through the entire novel. We come to, without any hyperbole, the pivotal and most discussed and elaborated on Book 5 of the 12, Pro and Contra. Before leaving, Ivan wants to know his little brother better, meeting him in a restaurant. There, he lays out his manifesto, the one the majority of critics attribute to Dostoevsky himself. But Ivan isn't content with plain words and goes further to solidify his position by reciting a parable of his own creation, one that was staged and filmed as a separate piece in the 20th and 21st centuries, a poem set in the time and location of the Spanish Inquisition. Stepping away from both the main storyline and subplots, the sixth book focuses entirely on Father Zosima. Alyosha is able to put his last words into written form. We learn this way of Father Zosima's younger years and how he came to be a famous monk. We receive his teachings on monks, nobility and servants, faith and prayer, as well as the eternal hellfire. Much of what he tells correlates with the beliefs of Ivan stated in the previous book. These similarities are obviously intentional. The seventh book begins the third chapter and tells us more about our main protagonist. He meets Grushenka again and learns that her long-awaited betrothed has returned and is waiting for her in a village named Mokroye. Alyosha visits the monastery one last time before leaving to see the world, as he was told by Father Zosima, who posthumously upsets Alyosha by starting to exude a deathly odor, a thing that irks the superstitious monastery. Dmitri, or Mitya for short, becomes the center of our attention in the 8th book. His obsession with Grushenka and his self-destructive fatalism push him to seek quick profit. Unable to succeed, he entertains the idea of patricide, which will kill 2 birds with 1 stone, solve his financial issues, and resolve the love triangle. He comes very close to actually murdering Fyodor Pavlovich, but then flees, injuring his old servant Grigory, who took his father's place throughout his youth. He's seen possessing a large sum of money while covered in blood, buying expensive delicacies and champagne after discovering where Grushenka went. He eventually finds her with her future groom, and along with her discovers that the man she was waiting for all this time doesn't love her. So much heartbreak calls for a celebration. Mitya's actions prior to his departure for Mokroe arouse suspicion that escalates quickly. As the body of his father with a caved-in skull is discovered at his house, in the 9th book the investigators catch up with Dmitri and proceed to question him. He immediately admits to killing Grigory, being aware that gentle, faithful servant survived, but vehemently refuses the claim that he is responsible for the death of his father. He's also forced to explain the nature of the money and confesses to theft from his betrothed Ekaterina a long time ago. This concludes the 3rd chapter. The 10th book of the novel further elaborates on the subplot of the fate of the bullied boy Alyosha, the son of Captain Snegiryov. He's taken under the wing of the 13-year-old socialist Kolya Krasotkin, who takes care of him after Alyosha falls terminally ill right after attacking Alexei. His family cannot afford the expensive treatment, and the proud father refuses to accept financial help, leading to Alyosha's death. Ivan comes back and worries his friends and family with his sickly appearance in the 11th book. He is tormented by guilt, blaming himself for his father's demise. Could the feeling of guilt come from something else? He keeps visiting the bastard Smerdyakov, who speaks to him in riddles and reminds him of all the talks they had, which obviously had the most profound influence on his outlook and beliefs. The charm, the intelligence, and the eloquence of Ivan have done irreparable damage to Smerdyakov. He later openly confesses to murdering Fyodor Karamazov, only to later hang himself in his room. Almost everyone Mitya knows comes to his side during the trial that takes place in the last book. Ivan tells of Smerdyakov's confession and blames himself. Ekaterina, who's at this point is in love with Ivan, fears for his freedom and reveals a handwritten note from Dmitri in which he threatens to kill his father if he ever needs money. Despite the lawyer's best efforts, the jury finds Dmitri guilty, sentencing him to 20 years of hard labor in Siberia. Realizing her mistake, Ekaterina promises to organize his escape. The epilogue starts with discussion of Dmitri's escape to America with Grushenka, to later return under aliases. Dmitri's health cannot sustain the trial and the jar of hearts, leading to his illness. He is visited by Ekaterina in the hospital. Mitya apologizes for betraying her and stealing from her, while she proceeds to ask for forgiveness for her role in the trial and promises to help. The book's finale is the funeral of Alyosha, where all his friends listen to Alyosha speak, giving them advice and moving them deeply. I want to live for immortality. I will accept no compromise. Unsurprisingly, there's a lot of speculation around the historical prototypes for most of the main characters in the book. Just like many before and after him, Dostoevsky was known for using criminal records for inspiration. Furthermore, he reused parts of his unfinished works when writing the Brothers Karamazov. Some of his ideas date back to 1846. The main inspiration is said to be the story of Dmitri, who was falsely accused of patricide and sentenced to 10 years in prison. His life story became the foundation for the novel. Dostoevsky officially started working on the novel in 1878. The first drafts are dated April of that year. It was written over the span of 3 years. As we already know, it consists of 12 books, each of them a concluded story. Although it must be mentioned that through many editions, some of them grew to more than twice their original length. During his work, the author consulted lawyers and physicians in search of the utmost verisimilitude in the narration and its details. The concept was heavily influenced at various stages by the works of other writers and philosophers. Among them were Hugo and Tolstoy. Ivan's question whether a child's death is an acceptable sacrifice for everyone's happiness is Dostoevsky's answer to Hugo's opinion that the death of the young Louis XVII was justified by the noble goal of the people's prosperity. The novel was published in the Russian Messenger magazine from January 1879 to November 1880. In December of the same year, a separate publication was released in 2 volumes. Here, the novel received a few adjustments from Dostoevsky to the names of minor characters for the sake of consistency, as well as some stylistic corrections. It was actually conceived as the first part of a trilogy depicting the story of Alexei Karamazov and his path toward an attempt on regicide, but unfortunately it never came to fruition due to Dostoevsky's death in 1881. The reception of such a controversial piece could never be calm and measured. Contemporaries found the main characters to be grotesque and their behavior exaggerated and uncharacteristic of its class. Dostoevsky was overwhelmed by the number of letters he received from young readers and members of high society. Critics were divided. In terms of the impact, Dostoevsky considered it his greatest success, and rightfully so. So many celebrities have voiced their thoughts on the Brothers Karamazov. I can't help but feel that in doing so, they've opened a brief window in their own beliefs and convictions. Freud, for example, praised the novel immensely, calling it the most magnificent novel ever written, and proceeded to analyze Dostoevsky's psyche in his article. Nietzsche referred to Dostoevsky as the only psychologist he could learn from. There are far too many to list them all. It's particularly interesting that among those who disliked the Brothers Karamazov were Nabokov and Tchaikovsky. The latter said he perceived almost every character in the book as mentally ill or at least painfully neurotic, while the atmosphere felt oppressive and heavy. I don't know about you, but to me that sounds like high praise. Camus and Sartre were both inspired by Brothers Karamazov. The former saw the metaphysical rebel rising up against the futility of human suffering, while criticizing him for refusing to act and dying in contradiction. The dilemma of being cold, rational, and mischievous, or on the contrary benevolent, drives Ivan mad. A beast can never be as cruel as a human being, so artistically, so picturesquely cruel. You must remember the article written by the well-educated and talented Ivan that everyone was discussing in the second book when we first meet our characters. That right there is one of the most important catalysts for the majority of later discussions, arguments, and speculations around the world for the centuries to come. I've already mentioned Sartre, who referred to Dostoevsky saying that his implication that there is no God and therefore everything is permitted is the basis for existentialism. But one must not forget the responsibility for one's thoughts and actions. Sartre didn't see it as deterministic, rather liberating. Beautiful, isn't it? Such a gorgeous interpretation is nowhere to be found in the novel, though. Its subtle beauty lies in the fact that the mystery of the human soul and its existence is never labeled or judged. You are presented with its burning questions, its torment, and its tossing between convictions and ideas, and left without answers. Going into dialogue with Kant, Dostoevsky confronts his antinomies from the Critique of Pure Reason. All four of them are put under a microscope. Was the universe created and therefore finite, or is it eternal and infinite? Is there immortality, or is everything finite? Do we possess free will, or are we only driven by the laws of nature? Is there a God, the creator of the universe? There's no way of solving them with our mind and logic alone. Kant's dilemmas are echoed in the devil's speech in the novel. The Dark One aims to confuse us with such conundrums and make us question our faith. The constant tossing betwixt them eventually drives one insane. It's Dostoevsky speaking through Ivan here. He's sharing his own turmoil with us. Being an atheist throughout his youth, Dostoevsky consciously chose the path of faith in God, the choice that spared him Ivan's fate. Dostoevsky witnessed so much injustice during his lifetime, enduring exile, false accusations, and worse yet, being put through personal inferno of losing an infant daughter. He wept and sobbed like a woman in despair, his second wife recalled. A gentle soul of an idealist comes this close to shattering and imploding completely in times like these. One can only imagine what such an amount of intense suffering can do to a man's inner world. All that leads me to believe that these hardships had an immense influence on his art and the themes he delved into. The main character of the novel, Alyosha, is convinced of God's existence. This gives him strength and confidence. That's exactly where the sentiment of wanting to live for immortality and accepting no compromise comes from. Knowing what the author had in store for his protagonist in the finale of the trilogy, one can't help but wonder what Alexei meant by immortality. Or did his idea of the concept change along the way? I'd wager that the paths of Kolya Krasotkin and Alexei Karamazov would cross again years later, when the former has grown. Given how opinionated he was in his teens, we can only imagine the kind of adult he would become in the setting of post-feudal 19th century Russia. Dmitri, however, is not a monk, or a mystic like his younger brother. He's destined for catastrophe from his birth, abandoned and devoid of motherly and even fatherly love, raised in superstition while witnessing decadence. As an intelligent young man, he's bound to question even the best of human intentions. It seems as though he's drawn to the comfort of faith, while at the same time doubt creeps in. He may not be able to call it out specifically, but he says the famous God and the devil are fighting there and the battlefield is the heart of man. But he has no emotional foundation to remain steadfast in his belief. He questions it, as he questions and doubts himself while destroying himself with a scary conviction. There's not an iota of fun or elation in his partying. It's desperate and filled with doom. Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. Siding with Dostoevsky himself, I doubt the concept of the categorical imperative, on the grounds of how fickle human faith and conviction can be at times, and just how bad of a hand some of us are dealt in this world. Only few of us possess the inner strength to remain a beacon of hope, love, and benevolence. For most of us, mere humans trying to survive, the instinct is stronger. However, logic, the greater good, the forward momentum of the entire human race is reason enough to strive for its best interests, both on personal and societal levels. The notion that every single one of us is responsible for the way we conduct ourselves in the vastness of the yet unknown universe is yet to be adopted by us on the most basic of levels. Here's hoping we prove our doubters wrong. Whether it's faith in God or pure conscience driving us to better ourselves and serve humanity isn't that important to me personally, as long as the final goal is the betterment of mankind. The glowing example of the aforementioned beacon is Jonas Salk, an American virologist who refused to patent the polio vaccine, simply stating, "There is no patent. Could you patent the sun?" It's not just the fact that he didn't try to capitalize on his paradigm-shifting work, it's the fact that it didn't even cross his mind. Despite all the setbacks and however long it takes, I'm convinced that humanity's future is bright, because people like Salk aren't unique. We're always free to draw our own conclusions from every book of the Brothers Karamazov. It is a work of an accomplished literary genius, who, like I said, has nothing to prove, and is only driven by his own inner turmoil, his analytical mind, his observations and understanding of human nature and soul, the lengths it can go in every direction, and the eternal problems it faces every moment of it being so acutely and sometimes painfully awake. I believe, like a child, that suffering will be healed and made up for, that all the humiliating absurdity of human contradictions will vanish like a pitiful mirage, like the despicable fabrication of the impotent and infinitely small Euclidean mind of man, that in the moment's finale, at the moment of eternal harmony, something so precious will come to pass that it will suffice for all hearts, for the comforting of all resentments, for the atonement of all the crimes of humanity, for all the blood that they've shed, that it will make it not only possible to forgive, but to justify all that has happened. We all know what transpired in the next 100 years since this was written. The bank of injustice and spilled blood has ticked our credit score a few points up. Would anyone dare to explain how this belief manages to persist? Despite all the doubts, so very justified. So let us share some of Sartre's positive outlook on the freedom of man while mixing in a bit of naive and pure hope. This is my last message to you. In sorrow, seek happiness. Some say the Brothers Karamazov offer a glimpse into the mystery of the Russian soul, but I remain convinced that there is no such mystery, no unique type of soul confined to one culture or nation. We like to call Blood Meridian essentially American, but is it really? Did Americans invent conquest and horrific violence? Anyone vaguely familiar with history would immediately disagree. Are the socio-philosophical dilemmas Dostoevsky presents somehow exclusive to Russians? Or are they universal, meant for everyone, thoughtful enough to confront the ever-present unanswered questions of our existence? Does cruelty and inhumanity live within all of us, just beneath the surface? Are we not all driven by the same desires for love, success, fulfillment, recognition, and reassurance? You be the judge of that. But the answer is yes. Like most great masterpieces, the Brothers Karamazov doesn't offer a definitive ending. It doesn't moralize or preach, it doesn't try to convince you of anything. It simply lays out its narrative and ideas, sharing something intimate and profoundly relatable. That, to me, is what's so fascinating about classic literature, how modern and cutting-edge it still feels. That's our link to generations before us. As long as human nature doesn't radically change or transcend into something entirely different, we'll continue to empathize with people from the 19th century with remarkable ease. Besides, nowadays almost all capable people are terribly afraid of being ridiculous and are miserable because of it. Sound familiar? If this video convinces even one person to read the Brothers Karamazov, it will have fulfilled its purpose, whether by inspiring you as it did for so many before, or by provoking deeper self-reflection and understanding of those around you. It's intriguing, it's provocative, at times disturbing, and even dangerous to feebler minds. But that's exactly what makes it genius, timeless and worthy of your time. Thank you very much for watching, and until we meet again in the next video.